Hi, thanks for joining us today for the Best Practices Installation module from the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project. If you've just recently also viewed the orientation module, a percentage of this information will be repeated, but we hope to go deeper and look a little bit more closely about those best practices actually required to do installations in the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project program. My name is Dan, a former contractor working 15 years in the energy efficiency side of the business as a contractor, and I'll be here today to walk you through this as we try to learn a little bit more about how to apply best practices to each and every one of our installations. So with that, with no further ado, let's kick off today's training. What today's module will cover is how to achieve a best practices installation. We're going to talk about the required tools from the perspective of the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project. Keep in mind, we also want you following your manufacturer's specific instructions and specifications, but these are the best practices overall that should cover all installs. We'll follow the quality assurance both from the process perspective as well as the findings perspective. We're going to talk about setting indoor and outdoor units correctly, running line sets and drainage correctly, and then we'll talk about the 4 C's of mini splits: connecting, checking, charging, and commissioning. Then we'll round out talking a little bit about educating homeowners and utilizing project resources. So with no further ado, one more time I want to thank you for spending your time with us today. We know it's valuable. We'll attempt to get this module done in approximately 60 minutes. With each Northwest Ductless Heat Pump project, the question often gets brought up: who is the sponsor of this? Who is behind the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump project? We'd like to introduce you to the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or NEA, if you're not already familiar with them. The Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, it's a nonprofit, and the goal of it is to impact market transformation by getting people to accelerate and adopt energy efficient products or services or practices. So NEA has many initiatives that it works on. Some you may be familiar with are Hot Water Solutions, the initiative specifically targeting heat pump water heaters, and the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project, specifically targeting ductless heat pumps. NEA does these for 2 main reasons. One, from a bigger perspective, NEA can use this market transformation to accelerate the adoption of codes and standards, thereby improving the energy efficiency of our region and ensuring our long-term stability with how we grow as a region and how we address the energy needs for that growth. Secondly, NEA is actually an alliance of 140 or so members that are utilities and energy efficiency organizations such as Energy Trust of Oregon and Bonneville Power Administration. NEA can leverage the buy-in from all of the members of the alliance to be able to design and implement core portions of programs that each utility can then implement as they desire. This means that for each utility, there's less investment in having to put together a program than otherwise they would have to face. This allows small utilities, rural utilities, large utilities, and groups like the Energy Trust of Oregon to all benefit from the work that is leveraged by having a large network or a large alliance. And they touch over 13 million energy consumers in the Pacific Northwest, which we think of as Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. So that was a bit about who's behind the project. Let's talk a little bit about the project's objectives and some of the successes to date. The objectives or the goals of this project more specifically: we want to displace electric resistant heat with energy efficient ductless systems. So electric resistance heat by its nature is about 100% efficient. That means 100% of the energy that comes in is directly translated into heat that comes out. While that sounds exciting, heat pump technologies actually work by moving temperature from one fluid into another. And that can be from air into a refrigerant, or the other way, from a refrigerant into air, or even into water. Um, when you use it to move heat in and out of fluids through compression and evaporation technologies, you can get systems that are 200, 250, 300, 400 even percent efficient. So on average, we're talking about displacing 100% efficient heat in a large portion of a home with something that is about 280% efficient. So we're talking about a pretty strong leap forward. We also want to, the second goal is to increase the consumer awareness and regional adoption of ductless technologies. As it turns out, these technologies are widely known and widely available in Central Europe and in Asia. But if only a small percentage of the market share here, truly across the United States, 1 to 2%, is really adopted this technology yet. That's a little bit higher in the Pacific Northwest because of our efforts. In fact, let's talk about that success and the efforts. Over 60,000 Northwest Ductless Heat Pump project installations have got utility incentives. That's easily over 100,000 if you count projects that were not utility incentivized. That's over the course of just the past 8 years or so. So we've seen a really big dent to the market, but it's still just scratching the surface. There's still a lot of opportunity to be had. We've trained over 1,000 project installers, but again, there's still room for many more to be trained because we still have a lot of homes to displace. We have roughly about 100 participating utilities offering rebates and incentives, and we've worked very hard to build strong relationships with manufacturers, retailers, and our contractor network, such as you attending today. And we do that last one because we believe that success truly, if we're talking about market transformation, is making sure that the manufacturers, the retailers and distributors, and the contractors are all on board with this concept of how can we address the right homes with displacement. In other words, a low-cost introductory approach for homeowners who are concerned about their existing heating system to bring them comfort, energy efficiency, and reduced bills. So that are the basic project objectives and successes for our program. So what have we found so far? Well, we found that these systems are for real. If you recall from the orientation webinar, we actually showed you some data from a few projects, and we actually are able to see that these are performing even in simply the displacement approach. And we find that customers love them. This may sound hard to believe, but we actually have a 97% satisfaction rate with homeowners. As it turns out, the things we thought homeowners would be concerned about, we heard over and over from contractors and real estate professionals, homeowners aren't going to like that thing on the wall. As it turns out, if that thing on the wall, quote unquote, is actually capable of delivering even temperatures throughout the home, adding cooling to a home that didn't have it before, and it's able to do it without wasting resources, and it can save energy and dollars, turns out homeowners don't mind it. And we've actually done several market progress evaluations where we've engaged with homeowners and have gotten this feedback on a regular basis. We have found that these DHPs are an important energy efficiency measure for our region. It's one of the things that, from a utility perspective, is cost effective to actually go out and, again, reduce the burden on electric resistance heat, which is a much larger burden to our overall utility infrastructure than our heat pumps. And this is going to allow our region to grow at a moderate pace without outstripping the ability to produce energy that we have. We find this to be very important. We've also found that following the quality installation requirements are critical to these things having the long-term performance and value that they promise. It's one thing for something to perform great for 9 months. It's another thing for it to perform great for 9 years or 18 years or even 20 plus years. So we found that these quality installations are critical. And overall, when you combine all this, the fact that you're here today listening to this module means that you're engaged, and that helps our future look promising. So I promised we'd talk about quality assurance. Um, from the process perspective, each utility has a different amount of QA that they may take on. Each state public utilities commission will mandate a minimum that each utility has to follow. And from that, utilities then may go anywhere from as low as 10% of the homes to as many as 100% of the homes actually having on-site quality assurance inspections. They are also looking at close to 100% of the paper forms that are submitted. So that is to make sure that eligible homes are coming in and we're actually recording all of the data on the household and on the installation itself. From that process perspective, we've uncovered over the past 8 or so years some really key things that have made a big difference in how these things perform and some of the things that have been very common in the deviations that we found. So the most common 3 QA deviations: lack of line set protection. This is really designed to be protected in 2 ways. The first and foremost is from UV deterioration. Even when the system is placed on the north side of the home, it's not in direct sunlight for much or any of the day, UV rays are still bombarding our insulation. If there's not UV protection built into the insulation, UV tape put on, or even better, a hard cover put on, that will actually deteriorate the foam line set insulation covers and can lead to eroding and actually disintegration over time. If you look at heat pumps installed in the 70s and 80s, you'll often see that that's true with the line set insulation on them. The second is, of course, physical damage from neighborhood cats and rodents and children and other contractors and rocks shot out of the lawnmower. That is a protection you're only going to gain if these things are installed correctly. They're either hard wrapped with UV tape or have a hard cover put on them. We really do want to make sure this line set insulation is protected. The outdoor unit must be secured enough that it will not sink into the earth. It must be level, and it must be able to withstand wind, rain, snow, leaves. So making sure it's elevated enough so that debris will not interfere with airflow, making sure none of the parts will ever be under snow or water, and then making sure that the surfaces are level and not in a high erosion area are all going to be critical. And then finally, poor homeowner education has been, believe it or not, one of our larger QA fails, or as we refer to as deviations. So we do find that one of the most critical things, and you guys as contractors already know this, setting proper homeowner expectations is critical to the success of any installation. So having the ability to educate the homeowners is really an important piece. By going through the project orientation, today's best practices webinar, going through your manufacturer installer training, and then utilizing our resources on the website, we firmly believe we can give you enough information and even give you some leave behinds for homeowners to really set those expectations correctly. Some additional concerns: inadequate clearances around the equipment, interrupting airflow, and then generally aesthetic, unappealing installations. Most of you would probably guess this, and you probably know this from other work that you do. Word of mouth is one of the top, and our market progress evaluations have shown this again and again. The top way is referrals through word of mouth that people get new business. I will say the internet is starting to creep up and approach that in our region, so be aware if you're looking how to maximize your participation with the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project, or in general, how to sell more DHPs. We're finding that word of mouth is still king, but coming up quick is internet access. So homeowners love to be able to do research on these things, and we'll again talk about collateral you can have on your website that we've generated that will help homeowners understand this. All this being said, QA inspections are not going to uncover all these issues. It's particularly when they're looked at maybe 10 or 25% of the homes. So contractor communication, contractor understanding, and contractor adoption of these best practices are going to be key to learning about everything that matters with these installs. and making sure homeowners are satisfied. So let's get to some of these equipment and installation minimum requirements. These systems must all be inverter-driven compressors with variable speed fans. We also refer to them as VRF, or variable refrigerant flow systems. That's a minimum requirement. There are some no-name brands out there that are mini split heat pumps that are single stage. That would not qualify for our program. They must have a minimum HSPF of 9 for single zones. If you're installing multi-zone equipment, and this is said lower, it's allowed, but we only still give 1 rebate per home. So if you install 2 1-to-1 systems, you still only get the 1 rebate. Right now, 8 HSPF is required for multi-zone, but I do want to give you a note that in the fourth quarter of 2018, that's actually going up to 8.2, thanks to the federal standard minimums. So you may want to start looking at 8.5 HSPF as something that you're integrating in for your multi-zone applications, or 8.2 at the very minimum, so you're well prepared for that federal minimum standard change. And then, of course, vacuum pump and flare fittings on refrigerant lines. Those flare fittings are critical to making sure when we tighten up the flare nuts that we're actually getting low chances of refrigerant leakage. We also want to make sure that you're following all of our Northwest ductless heat pump and your manufacturer-specific best practices for installation, which include things like installing the indoor head in the main living area so it can achieve the greatest energy savings. And by that, it needs to be able to move its air through the main body of the home with the least amount of interruptions. So really think about where that indoor head should go to actually make this, to achieve the best reach in the main body of the home. And then please install a system on a dedicated electrical circuit. This is just to make sure that the microwave running doesn't accidentally trip the circuit at the same time as the DHP and cause a power outage in the home. So again, a dedicated electric circuit makes sense. Again, multi-zone equipment is allowed. Only 1 rebate per home, and one of the zones must be the main body of the home. There are some new things coming. Starting in 2018, you will now be required to have an EPA 608 refrigerant license to purchase refrigerant. That's because R410A is an HFC refrigerant, and the regulations have been extended in the EPA rules to include all HFCs and HFC substitutes. So therefore, the sale of HFCs are going to be restricted to those with an EPA 608 refrigerant license only. They're also updating the technician certification exam. Please don't fret or fear if you already have a 608 license. You do not need to get recertified. That is not what they're saying. But for new people, just to be aware, they are making some updates to the training and to the certification exam itself. And this applies to anyone installing, servicing, repairing, or maintaining a ductless heat pump. Finally, there's some new record-keeping requirements as well. This really has to do with handling of excess or waste refrigerant that's been removed from a system, particularly when you have a large volume of it, 5 pounds or more. Again, big multi-zone systems would qualify, or if you had multiple jobs a day where you had to remove this. So there will be specific new record-keeping requirements attached. Please learn about this. Look it up. Again, starting January 1st, 2018, R410A will only be sold to those with the 608 license. We like to say RTDM, read the darn manual. Basically, this should be a no-brainer. But we mentioned this in the orientation webinar. Along with attending our basic introduction, we also require that you attend the manufacturer-specific trainings, at least enough to get their basic specs. We want you to learn everything the manufacturer is willing to train you on, because they will have much more specific guidance for the actual devices you're installing. What we can give today is general guidance that covers the broad spectrum, but your manufacturer can actually give you the information needed the specifications, the best practices needed for the actual devices that you're installing. Please read the manual and get the manufacturer-specific training. Believe it or not, one of the other things we've started to see creep up, it wasn't one of the major deviations from the past 8 years, but we're starting to see this, has been particularly with multi-zone units, not necessarily matching the heads with the outdoor units and the heads with each other. So manufacturers and distributors, they outline compatibility, but really that's on you, the installer, to make sure the systems you're buying, the indoor heads are designed to work together if you're doing a multi-zone system, and that all of them are designed to work specifically with the compressor outside. If you look at what we're seeing now, we've got a couple examples. They actually will show you allowable combinations. The manufacturers have this information. Your distributor should carry it and should be able to help you with this discussion. But we've seen an increased amount of incompatible unit installations over the past year or two. So this is creeping up as something that we really want you to focus on. Make sure the heads that you're installing are compatible with one another, and then make sure whether it's a 1-to-1, multiple 1-to-1s, or a 2-to-1 system, that the indoor heads are compatible with the compressor. So, the required tools for installation, we want to go through these one at a time. The first is a ratchet flaring tool. If you've done any type of refrigerant work before, you're probably familiar with a tool such as this. This is what allows you to create the flares on your line set for your connections. And we want to make sure that you have an R410A specific one that you set aside and say, I'm only going to use this for R410A jobs. Why? You probably maybe already know this, but if you aren't thinking about it, it's because the residual oils left over from different types of refrigerant installations that you may do throughout the course of your day, particularly if you're doing other heat pumps, or if you're also doing refrigeration units or something of that nature, they can each leave residual oils behind. And what we don't want is cross-contamination of oils that are not designed to be appropriate for R410A. So get a ratchet flaring tool, set it for R410A, set it aside for that purpose only. This will help make sure, again, your flare fittings you'll be able to do the flares correctly, and your fittings will not have that easily correctable problem. Similarly, get a gauge and hose set designed for R410A refrigerant, and make sure you only use it for R410A refrigerant. As it turns out, we'll talk about this in a little bit, the gauge and hose set, you're only going to need to use this in certain scenarios. One of the beautiful things about DHPs and mini splits in general is that they design them so that you only have to remove or add refrigerant in instances where the line set length goes outside of the 10 to 25 feet for most units. And I'll cover this a little bit more in another slide. But basically, the R410A refrigerant gauge and hose set is only going to be used at times where you have to actually weigh in and remove out any refrigerant. So pay attention to that. The same goes for the programmable refrigerant charging scale. We like programmable ones. One of the keys here is, can things be duplicated and be replicable? If you can replicate the work over and over again, that's going to give you consistency in your installations. Programmable scales are the way to get there. And then the good old-fashioned torque wrench. You want the torque wrenches that are designed to work with the systems you're using, right? Think about it this way. I know that you think that your arm in a monkey wrench, that's all the torque knowledge you need. But we've actually found that, a 6-year-old with the torque wrench can more accurately tighten and not over tighten a nut compared to a lot of professionals not using torque wrenches. So just make sure we're not over or under tightening. It's very easy to do, to over torque a nut. A torque wrench can be really helpful here to make sure we don't do that. So these are our required tools for you to have with you. Please make sure you're following through, and make sure that every one of your trucks has this setup if they're installing DHPs. Next, we want to talk about setting the outdoor unit, or the compressor as it's more commonly referred to. First things first, set it on a stable, level surface. Now, some people think just putting a concrete pad on the ground is going to work. We want to make sure that that earth, you've tamped it down first. Depending on the type of soil and aggregate that's beneath it, you may need to tamp it down so that once weight is put on the pad, it remains level, that it doesn't sink. You also want to look to see, is it on a slope? If it's on a slope, what is that going to do to long term? Is it going to eventually tilt downhill? You're going to want to look to see, are there any downspouts nearby causing runoff from the roof to maybe erode the soil in that area, because that can also offset this over the long term. You want to, on as many installations as possible, always have at least the minimum riser. This riser is going to prevent debris buildup underneath, allow defrost water to drain out, and also allow to make sure that airflow happens all the way around the unit. If you're in an area that routinely gets 6 inches of snow or more, even if it's once a year, you're going to want more than just the minimum riser. You're going to want to think about, how can I elevate this to be high enough that it will meet that clearance. If you routinely, multiple times a year, get 6 inches of snow or more, you may want to consider wall mounting units. Wall mounting units can work very well. We would warn you that when you wall mount a unit, you want to use anti-vibration or vibration dampening mounts, particularly on 2x4 walls. 2x4 walls can transfer sound, vibration sounds through them. So if you end up mounting it on a wall to protect against snow or leaf debris or something of that nature, make sure you're understanding a 2x6 versus a 2x4 wall, and use vibration mounts if it's a 2x4 wall. And then making sure the unit is secured. So combination of bolts and adhesive where necessary will make sure that this thing doesn't slip over when a game of backyard football results in little Tommy tumbling into the compressor. You may laugh, but that actually happened to my younger brother when we were kids, and he poked the corner of their old heat pump, poked a hole in his cheek when he ran into it. But you know what? The thing was secured. He didn't budge it. So let's make sure little Tommy playing football in the backyard won't budge this thing if he accidentally bumps into it. So let's talk a little more specifically about refrigerant tubing. Everyone's favorite topic, right? We bring this up because it's important to not reuse the factory tubing, flares, and fittings. Those are designed for shipping. What we want you to use are the DHP nuts. These are usually included in it. They're the beefier of the two nuts. And we want you to create new flares using the appropriate R410A flaring tool we talked about and measurement gauge. Apply your refrigerant oil to the end of each flare. Connect the tubing with these R410A nuts, and then use the torque wrench to tighten to your manufacturer's specific specifications. This is pretty critical. We've found that when this is done, we have almost maybe 1 or 2 instances of refrigerant leaks when there was actually a decently installed flare and the proper nut used. And those were usually because there was a default in the line itself or in the nut. We've found ones where they used the factory nuts, they over-tightened them, or they did not do a good flare. That's where we found refrigerant leakage in QA over the years. Let's make sure we're not happening here. Refrigerant leaks lead to lower performance on our pieces of equipment and can even lead to shorter lifespans for the equipment. Refrigerant charge, I mentioned this earlier. Only if it's necessary. So it turns out a great many of the installations don't require any adjustment from the pre-charged levels. So therefore, the gauges aren't needed to verify these refrigerant levels if you're not making a change. If an adjustment is needed, that's when we use that scale for adding and removing refrigerant. Please consult the manufacturer's manual to verify the protocols and specifications for each of them, because it can be quite different depending on the brand. If you look in the example, though, that we have here, this is from a Mitsubishi product. It says if it's up to 25 feet in length, no additional charge is required. If it exceeds 25 feet, Additional charges required. See the table below. That's a fairly common way that these are communicated. Some of them will also be very specific about a minimum line set length, so please pay attention to that. If you're not outside of the range of requirements and specifications from the manufacturers, you likely are not needing to add or move, and therefore you are likely not needing to use your gauge and your scale. Insulating and protecting the line sets. Insulation needs to cover the entire length of line set. You know, it's interesting. The last foot or so, as we get close to our flaring nuts and our connections, that's where we often see a lot of exposure. And it's typically because during the connection, the installer cut back the insulation a little bit to give them a little more room to work with. We do not recommend doing that. Instead, we recommend pulling the insulation back and using a zip tie or some tape to hold it in place while you're making your connections. Then you can release that insulation and make sure it stretches back and covers the full piece. You can also cut additional pieces of insulation to cover the rest of your connection and the rest of any turns, terminations, connections with your line set length. We also, again, really need to protect our the outdoor portion of our line set from UV degradation and physical damage. The two most common ways to do that are to use UV tape and to make sure it is well installed and very secure. The other preferred method is to do a hard line set cover. With the tape, we've heard that there have been some occasional places where code inspectors or permit inspectors didn't like the UV tape itself, and they asked to see something other than that being installed. So we prefer the hard line set cover whenever possible. It also makes things look clean and nice. It's going to give you superior protection. That said, we know that's not always realistic and reasonable, particularly if you're trying to bring the best pricing to the homeowner and they're on a budget. It's not always affordable, but whenever possible, the hard line set cover. When not possible, a very well done tape job with UV tape would work. Where you penetrate the exterior wall, spray foam is most commonly used. You know, just a one-part can of foam. While that is wonderful for an air sealing gap, it is not always weatherproof, and particularly from windy rain and sun. It will degrade over time when exposed to UV light. So if you use spray foam, please trim it back and then cover it with a silicone or other sealant that is rated for outdoor weather. That will ensure that you get the coverage. You'll protect against wind, rain, and sun. It's also not uncommon that with some line set runs, we actually have to go through an attic in order to get to the wall that we want to put the head on in order to get the best distribution inside the home. In fact, we've actually seen several installations on interior walls, which we're not opposed to. And by the way, our market progress evaluation has shown most homeowners aren't that worried about what wall it goes on either. That's fine if that's what needs to happen. However, please do not destroy the insulation in the attic without having a plan to take care of it. We've seen two different approaches from our best contractors who have the least amount of QA deviations. The first is to actually bring a roll of R30 insulation with them on every job, and if they have to go in the attic and they create a trench, as you're seeing in the picture here, they just cut that length out of the rolls of insulation and lay it back over their tracks. It's a little clumsy. It certainly doesn't work in tight attics, and it requires you carry insulation around with you. If that's not your speed, then a small hand rake can actually do a wonderful job of refluffing blown-in insulation. I'm not talking about just spreading it over it. I'm actually talking about using it to refluff any compressed insulation and try to smooth out the area so that you don't leave any part of the attic uninsulated. Running drainage can be a really interesting thing here. we have a couple things we want to protect against. We don't want to have excess water going up against the foundation of a home because we don't know how that foundation was installed and what other problems they may already have in the home. Instead, we want it to run away from it. The second, we don't want it running to any sidewalks or walkways or driveways where it could freeze and cause a slipping hazard for a homeowner, a pet, or a vehicle. So please make sure we're running it to the right place. It should be sloping downhill and can either be routed with the line set so the line set going from the head to the compressor, you can take the condensate and run it right next to that, or you can set it to a different termination point. You can also not terminate it in a crawl space. Those areas tend to have plastic vapor barriers down there, and if you terminate in there, it will just sit on top of that vapor barrier. And stagnant water is an attraction for rodents as well as a breeding ground for bacteria and mold. So please do not let it go to a crawl space. Please do not go to a walkway or pathway, particularly where it could freeze and cause an issue. Defrost discharge can be an even bigger problem because it happens during the winter months where freezing is much more likely. Pardon me. In the cold weather, these outdoor units can actually discharge quite a bit of water. So there are really two problems that can happen. One is it can freeze actually in the bottom of the unit if you're not using a unit that's designed for this. And second, it can cause a lot of discharge to run over a pathway of some sort. So make sure you prevent both. For cold climate installations, either make sure the unit has a pan heater installed with it. If you purchase one called an enhanced expanded capacity unit or a cold climate unit, they will most often have a pan heater already included. If not, you can get aftermarket pan heaters for the brands that you're installing. And that will protect the unit itself. The second thing is, again, comes down to unit placement. So making sure that there's plenty of clearance beneath the unit and that there's not it's not sloped to just hit directly to a walking pathway. If you're in really cold areas that may also have snow, these elevated units are a good way to do it, mounted on the wall. As I mentioned, with elevated units mounted on the wall, make sure you have vibration resistance, either in pads that you install or in the mounts themselves, to reduce vibration noise into the home. So let's look at this as an example of a well-installed outdoor unit. You'll notice it's got a rigid line cover. The wall penetration you can't see in this part of the picture is well sealed. It's got a riser block with adhesives. The anchor foot is connected with a bolt to the riser. The ground has been compacted in advance and made level, and then a pad has been set on it. This is a very good exterior installation and one that should last for the life of the unit. Let's take a look at some poorly installed outdoor units, and you tell me, what do you think this would do for the life of these units? They wanted to get clearance, so they set the unit on 2 concrete blocks. There was no compacting of the earth below, no pad, no adhesive to the pad, and they did it in an area that actually got flooded on a regular basis. With a little bit of weight, the whole thing has begun to sink into the earth. That is not a quality installation. This particular unit, they thought, shoot, that's protection, right? It's under the picnic table. But look at the defrost discharge. That is an awful lot of water to be running down a pathway during a cold month. That is asking for a slip and fall hazard. And here's some example of some really poor line set installation. In some cases, either pulled back too far or cut when connections were made, or in some cases altogether missing. Make sure the line set installation covers all line set on the exterior, all the way up to the nuts and to the connections. Quality installation is not just on the outside. The inside is also quite important. With a well-installed indoor unit, installed high on the wall, what do we mean by high on the wall? We typically mean 6 to 9 feet from the floor. You can get within usually an inch and a half or 2 inches from the ceiling, by the way. Please check your manufacturer specifications, but we've seen a great number of these installed high on the wall within a couple inches of the ceiling with no issues. But they can also be down as far as a foot from the ceiling. So high on the wall is going to give you your best distribution of both heat and cool during the winter and the summer months. If you happen to have a high vaulted ceiling, 12 foot, 15 foot, 18 foot on that side, there's really no need to go higher than 9 feet on that wall. You'll still get great distribution for the room. Second, leveled properly, particularly when there are windows also on that wall. It doesn't take much for this to look awkward and weird. Even a high performing unit that is not level can send a homeowner into a panic mode about will they ever be able to sell this house with this crooked system. And the last thing we want are homeowners trying to self-level these things after you've left. There could be, if it was disleveled enough, potentially even too much weight being put on bearings on one end of the fan blades compared to the other, and we don't yet know, but my guess would be I wouldn't want to put a lot of money that's going to help the longevity of that unit. And then finally, this is perhaps the most important in terms of performance. The main indoor unit is centrally located in the home for best circulation. So rule number 1 for displacement, displace the main body of the home. That means the dining room, living room, kitchen area, all connected to the main hallway. Second, orient the head so that it has nothing within 20 to 25 feet in front of it in terms of walls. By doing that, you'll ensure that what they call the throw, or the easy distribution and blowing of the hot or cool air out of the unit, doesn't run into any resistance and cause the thing to short circuit. We have seen homes where these are put in and there's a wall 12 feet away. The heat comes out, hits that wall, bounces right back, and pretty soon tells the system it's time to shut off. By doing that, it's short-circuiting itself because it really hasn't given a long enough run time to get the heat to the farther edges of the room. So proper orientation in the main body, leveled and high on the wall, that's going to be your ratio, your set for success. Now there are what they call floor-mounted units available and ceiling cassette units available from your manufacturers. Those are also allowed to be installed. Typically, ceiling mount units are installed more often in new construction and major remodels, where you've got that access. Floor mount or low on the wall units are acceptable if, again, you preset the expectation with the homeowner. But the standard head is going to be high on the wall, 6 to 9 feet from the floor. So let's take a look at some poorly installed indoor units. Here we have one where there's probably nothing wrong with the performance of this unit, but they used some line set because the way they had to run it was a little bit difficult, and they've left a very quite unattractive little area. They actually sell rigid line set corner covers designed for instances like this that would not have been hard to install. It would have cost them a few extra dollars, but it would have been well worth it, because in this particular one, the homeowner complained to the QA inspector that it was driving them crazy every time they looked at this. Here we have one that is neither level nor is it 6 to 9 feet from the floor. So this is not going to get very good distribution in the room, particularly during the heating mode, where you need to get that long throw. And you're also going to have a homeowner who is just not going to be pleased with the look of it. If that were the only place to put a head here, a floor-mounted unit would have been a better deal for this homeowner. And here we have another one, again, not high on the wall. And I can't quite tell if the unit itself isn't level or the window isn't level. I think it's the unit. But again, a double failure here. If that were the only wall to go, what they call floor-mounted or low-on-the-wall mounted unit would have been an acceptable alternative. Indoor disconnect switches. originally the way code had been written, it made it sound as if we needed to have a disconnect switch for the indoor head. Our program actually sent representatives to code hearings and joined the technical advisory groups for the codes in Oregon and Washington, and got code interpretations that have clarified indoor disconnect switches are not required on most residential installations. We do recommend that you verify this with your local code official. This has not been brought up in Montana and Idaho yet. It has only been brought up in Oregon and Washington. We actually have, if you need to get copies of those code interpretations, I'll give you an email address at the end of this presentation where you can reach out to us and we can send that to you. DHPs as primary heating systems. So I did talk about we want to do a displacement system for these homes. And we really covered why displacement is our program's goals in the orientation webinar. And it has everything to do with we want to get at least one head into as many homes as possible. And a displacement approach allows a really cost competitive way to approach and to increase comfort for homeowners, reduce waste of natural resources, and lower their utility bills. That said, there are some scenarios where the homeowner wants to see, can they get their DHPs to be a whole house system? One of the ways to do it is to do multiple heads. And that could be a multi-zone, 2 or 3 heads with one compressor, or 2 or 3 one-to-one systems. Other folks are saying, what if we could use a fan of some sort? Perhaps if there's an electric resistance furnace, could I use the fan in that furnace to help distribute the heat throughout the home? The answer is yes, you can, but it does take a little bit of creativity and thought. We want to make sure that if you're using an existing electric resistance furnace to try to do distribution, that you change the setting on the thermostat for that furnace. If you have your DHP set at 68 and your wall furnace, your central electric furnace set at 68, it is possible that the location of those two thermostats and the quality of what we call the dead band or the accuracy range of those thermostats could be different. And the furnace thermostat could actually call for heat before the heat pump. And that can do a number of things incorrectly. Worst case scenario, tell the heat pump to go to cooling mode while the furnace is in heating mode. Less likely just to run instead of the DHP. So making sure that we set that thermostat down a couple of degrees is one approach. Another approach is to put a remote thermostat sensor somewhere in a further away room that therefore it only calls for heat when that far away room is identifying that it is cool. In those scenarios, we'd still want to set it back a few degrees, which as it turns out, most homeowners are okay with their bedroom being 66 or 67 degrees when the main body is 69 or 70. There are lots of different ways to think about doing this. This is the kind of thing you want to connect with your homeowner and design a strategy that will actually work for their budget and cover their needs. When you do these, providing you're meeting all of our other installation requirements, you still qualify for the program, but you will still only get one incentive per home, regardless of how many heads or how many other pieces of equipment are installed. Homeowner education is key, right? So starts with making sure the homeowner is satisfied with the job. So this comes to that setting expectations that I mentioned earlier. Make sure the homeowner knows what a finished product is going to look like. Make sure they've asked a lot of questions in advance. You've had a chance to answer them, because a well-installed outdoor unit and a well-installed indoor unit combined with setting homeowner expectations correctly lands with a satisfied homeowner. And happy, well-educated homeowners turn out to be the best salespeople for you. Two quick examples. We had one instance where we heard from a contractor that they spent a little more time maybe than they planned on the first job that they did in this little neighborhood. They really wanted to make sure the homeowner seemed a little picky, and they really wanted to make sure that they nailed it for this homeowner. The homeowner was so pleased that at their local card game, they told all the neighbors, and that one job ended up leading to 10 jobs just by word of mouth because of a satisfied homeowner. We can flip that story on its other end. My sister, when she moved into a new to her home, it had an existing ductless heat pump system in the main body. It actually had ceiling cassette units in the bedrooms and downstairs, and those parts of the house were fairly comfortable. But the main body faced south, and no matter what, it never seemed to get heated or cooled quite right. And there were no instructions. No one was able to tell my sister how the controls worked. The previous homeowner had quit using it and was using instead a fireplace, or a wood stove rather. My sister had said at the end of this, they're going through a remodel right now. She will never have another ductless heat pump installed in her home. That was a failure of this. The head was undersized for the volume it was trying to achieve. No one left behind any set of instructions on how to utilize it or change it. All of this led to a very dissatisfied homeowner who has proclaimed loudly, despite my best efforts, to never put another DHP in a home of hers again. So think about those two different stories when you're thinking about homeowner education and whether or not it's actually important for you. Homeowner maintenance. We do know that some contractors will sell a maintenance plan to homeowners. That's fine. We don't get in the way of that. We do ask that you use good business principles and you're not trying to instill fear or pressure tactics on homeowners. We believe that that's not how you guys operate, so it's not a big fear, but we do always make sure to mention that. But at the very least, you need to be able to educate a homeowner what some of the routine maintenance is. Again, check with your manufacturer requirements because it could be they may have some own specific things. First and foremost is clean and check those filters on a semi-regular basis. Dirty air filters can reduce airflow, resulting in both decreased efficiency and increased noise. Two things we don't really want. They're pretty easy to clean. The homeowner manual will tell them how to do that, and we'll actually give them a schedule for how often that should happen. Make sure at least annually, I prefer seasonally, you clear any debris under and around the outdoor unit. That includes checking the snow levels during the winter. It means checking the leaves during the fall. It means checking for other debris, water runoff during the spring and summer. Again, that can be a big problem if it's not taken care of correctly. Inspect the outdoor unit and the refrigerant line sets for signs of physical damage. Make sure the neighborhood cats have not used the line set installation as a scratching post. Make sure that the condensate line termination, if it's outside, make sure it's not clogged with goop or doesn't have a frozen plug in it during the winter time. The frozen goop is much more common. It's gas units that are really going to produce a lot of condensate during winter months, so that's usually not much of an issue, but still worth checking the condensate line a couple times a year. And then make sure that the homeowner knows how to contact you, the HVAC contractor, for any further maintenance recommendations or periodic service packages. Again, the reason we do this, extend the longevity of the systems and make sure they're actually going to perform. So, how else can we educate our homeowners? Another part of best practice installation is continuing this. So, I mentioned before, setting expectations is one of the critical pieces here. We actually have some pieces you can use at your kitchen table conversations with homeowners that actually walk them through the orientation and the maintenance before they even get a decision on this. These leave behind instructions, we have ones on how to tell if a DHP is right for your home before they make the decision, and then leave behind instructions on year-long, year-round, basic guidance on, filter cleaning and debris checking. So we've got all types of things available at goingductless.com/partners. So I really recommend checking out the homeowner guide, check out the FAQ for the sales portion of your job. But these things can really, again, help set expectations on the front end and provide some education on the back end. So we also have, for the part we talked about and went into detail on today, the best practices on the installation. I'm going to make a recommendation that you print this out laminate it, and put one in each truck that's doing DHP installations for you. Heck, I'd go a step beyond that. I would actually get your manufacturer's specific instructions, laminate those, and put them in the truck right next to this. We've all seen what happens if you just put a piece of paper in the truck, but if you laminate it, you run the possibility this thing will actually last a year. And what a low-cost way to make sure that your install crews know what tools they need to have and know the best practices for each and every install they do. These are downloadable again at goingductless.com/partners. I do want to remind you that there are rebates and tax credits available depending where you're at. You can check on goingductless.com for a list of participating utilities and the rebates that they offer. The last time I checked, they range between about $450 and just over $1,000. That's pretty common. $500 to $1,000 in that range is a very common number. That's a nice addition to your pricing that can really help a homeowner make the decision. Tax credits are a little different. Oregon, the tax credit is available for all products purchased up until the end of 2017. So after that, the Oregon tax credit is sunsetting. Does it not mean that Oregon will not institute a new one sometime later in 2018 or 2019? So keep your eyes on that. The Montana tax credits are still going right now. They're really actually pretty good there as well. So check on those. You can Google these tax credits, RETC in Oregon and tax relief _energy for Montana. You can search for those if you don't have time to write down these links here. But I highly recommend looking into these, and I recommend checking with federal tax credits as well. While there are no federal tax credits right now for DHPs, those are very popular bipartisan packages that often tend to get input into our economic packages. So tax credits are quite popular. This kind of stuff could come back around, so keep your eye on that prize. We also have something called the Master Installer Program. For those of you that would like to set yourself apart from the rest of the crowd, the Master Installer Program really gives that opportunity to differentiate you as experienced and knowledgeable. We actually have the ability to do preferred listings on our partner finders, and we give you the opportunity potentially to connect with industry professionals and learn about our project findings. Whether it's a market progress evaluation, QA reports, or changes to our specifications, we look to our master installers as the first line of people we want to talk to about these things. So you can get yourself put in that position by following through if you're interested. This is not required, but if you're interested, the first requirement is that you've attended the installer orientation and the best practices modules or webinars, depending on how you got oriented to the program, that you install at least 25 systems within the last 3 years, 15 of which must have received a utility rebate. We ask for that because that means that we've got more data to track, and because it means you've gone through some QA. You would submit to the Northwest Ductless Heat Pump Project your installation date for all of the installations and all the data that goes with that, photo documentation of at least 2 utility rebated installations, and at least 1 homeowner testimonial. And we have a form on the website that you can download for that. If you complete and submit all this and sign, you can become a master installer in our program. For more information, go to goingductless.com/partners/contractors for more details. I do want to just wrap up a little bit more and push these website stuff again. We also have a consumer-facing portion of the website. So a homeowner can go to goingductless.com. You can drive them there, or they may be driven there by their participating utility. And when they go there, they can find basic things about ductless system frequently asked questions, or homeowner testimonials, and almost most importantly, the installer finder, where you, the contractors, are listed, and they can actually find you based on their city or zip code as they search. So we do have good stuff available for homeowners, even on the consumer branded portion of the site, and we're currently looking at how we can develop even more content for the consumer side to really help drive more adoption of this technology. We also have marketing collateral, marketing materials that you can use and can co-brand to make your own. Some of them go into really lightly a light explanation of the technology. I love the Live the Ductless Life, More Comfort, More Savings. Take a look at that online when you get a chance. I think it's a really handy conversation piece. Some of these others can be included in your marketing. They could be used on your website. I mentioned earlier, second to word of mouth is internet searching for how people get leads. So if they find you through the installer finder or you're doing other marketing, you can use this collateral either as handouts and leave behinds for part of your kitchen table conversations during sales or on your website. And we do recommend check with your distributor and manufacturer, because some of them actually have co-op marketing dollars, particularly for contractors that are doing volume with them. And those, you can use some of their marketing dollars to help you do printing or get the stuff onto your website. Again, we also have the partner version of the website, which I've mentioned several times, goingductless.com/partners. Here you'll find all the basics, the participation forms, lists of participating utilities and the incentives they offer, project requirements, master installer program information, those free marketing materials we just shown, and our contact information. I know we've gone through a lot today, and sometimes you see all this and say, there's no way I'm going to remember it all. The good news is virtually everything we talked about today is on the website, including our contact information, which I'll put up right now as well. And with this, I want to thank you very much for spending the past hour with us. It's important to us that we respect your time, and we hope this was as valuable to us as it was enjoyable for us to put out there for you. So with that, we'll say thank you very much, and good luck, and install more ductless heat pumps. Thank you very much.